My sibling insisted I hand over my home to him since he recently became a father. Now he's labeling me as disloyal. Just a week ago, my brother Mark appeared at my doorstep unexpectedly, cradling his newborn baby in one arm while clutching a stack of documents in the other. He mentioned needing to discuss something significant with me. I naturally assumed he wanted guidance about parenthood or perhaps simply needed some respite from his new responsibilities as a dad. I was completely mistaken. The moment I suggested making him some coffee, he interrupted me abruptly and declared, "This house isn't necessary for you anymore. You should hand it over to Usui, have an infant now." Initially, I actually chuckled. I believed it was another one of his peculiar attempts at humor. However, I quickly recognized he was completely serious. His expression showed no signs of jest. I simply gazed at him, anticipating a joke that never materialized. When I questioned what he meant, he dove into this lengthy rationale about how he and his spouse Jessica are struggling financially in their cramped apartment. Evidently, their property owner had increased the rent, and they were finding it difficult to manage their expenses with the addition of their newborn. Since I'm unmarried and in a stable financial position, he concluded I ought to transfer my house to him. Allow me to clarify. This property was inherited from my grandparents after they died a few years back. It's nothing extravagant, but it represents my ideal home. I spent countless summers here as a child and have numerous cherished memories connected to it. Once it became mine, I invested nearly all my accumulated savings into improvements: a modernized kitchen, fresh flooring, and even upgraded the water systems. This isn't merely a building to midst my sanctuary. I attempted to remain composed and logical. I explained to Mark, I truly sympathize with your difficulties, but this property was willed to me for a purpose. I've invested considerable effort into making it my own. But he persisted. He stated, "You have no dependents. It's self-centered to maintain all this for yourself when we have a child to consider." Jessica, who had apparently been waiting in their vehicle outside, entered at that moment. She began adding her opinions about how relatives should support one another and how they'd already figured out ways to utilize this space for their expanding household. Figured out she had the nerve to recommend I could lease a decent apartment elsewhere since I'm only one individual. I was completely shocked. I stated directly, "This is my residence. I'm not relinquishing it." That's when the situation turned hostile. Jessica began weeping. I'm convinced it was theatrical and said something along the lines of, "I anticipated she wouldn't comprehend. She's consistently been self-centered." Mark became increasingly confrontational and blamed me for keeping resources to myself. He literally stated, "It's unjust that you possess all this while we're barely surviving." By this point, I was so furious I could hardly maintain a calm tone. I requested they depart, but Mark dropped his stack of papers onto my living room table and said, "Consider it. It's what benefits the family most." After they eventually departed, I remained there staring at the folder. It contained documentation, proposed schedules for my relocation, a financial plan for how they'd care for the property, and even a pre-written notification to my homeowners association announcing the ownership transfer. I was astounded by their sense of entitlement. They had orchestrated this as if the decision was already finalized. The following day, matters deteriorated further. My parents contacted me, and surprisingly, they're supporting Mark's position. My mother said, "You don't require such a spacious residence, dear. Mark has an infant now, and it's reasonable to put the family's needs first." My father commented something like, "You're unattached, you have options. They don't." However, it was like attempting to reason with an immovable object. Each time I refused, they made me feel as though I was some sort of selfish antagonist. What wounded me most deeply was when my mother remarked, "I believed we instilled better values in you than this," as if I'm the one being irrational. For several days, I genuinely began questioning myself. Was I acting selfishly? Should I simply allow them to take the house? But then I recalled everything I'd endured to make this property truly mine. The countless evenings removing old wallpaper, the weekends dedicated to fitting cabinets, the years I preserved every spare dollar to make it a reality. I understood it wasn't merely about the property, it was about how minimally they valued my boundaries or my dedication. When I informed Mark once more that I wouldn't be transferring my house to them, he absolutely lost control. He claimed I was destroying the family unity and even labeled me as cruel. He left in anger. And later that evening, Jessica published an extensive emotional Facebook post about harmful family members who abandoned their relatives during difficult times. She didn't mention me specifically, but it was clear who her target was. Several of my extended relatives have already begun contacting me, questioning why I won't assist poor Mark and Jessica. Now I feel as though I'm being attacked from all directions. I'm uncertain how to manage this situation. It seems like my whole family has turned against me, and all because I declined something utterly absurd. The breaking point arrived this morning when I received a message from Mark stating, "If you don't make the correct choice, don't anticipate being involved in our lives going forward." And that includes your nephew. If you believed my brother demanding my house was outrageous, prepare yourself because circumstances have taken a direction I never anticipated. I didn't imagine it could become any more preposterous. I was mistaken. Following my brother Mark and his spouse, Jessica's angry departure from my house and their indirect Facebook attack, I assumed the conflict might begin to settle. I expected they'd ultimately recognize how absurd their request was and move forward. But no. Instead, I returned home from my job several days afterward to discover an envelope attached to my entrance door. Inside was a notification of legal proceedings. Yes, you understood correctly. Mark and Jessica are attempting to take legal action against me for my own property. Initially, I assumed it was a joke. Who behaves like that? But as I reviewed the paperwork, my heart sank. They're asserting that the house was part of the family's estate and that I unjustly acquired it without regard for their circumstances. They're insisting that I either transfer the ownership papers or liquidate the property and divide the money with them. I was utterly stunned. My grandparents bequeathed this house to me in their testament unambiguously, unmistakably, with my name documented on it. I had no influence over their choice, but evidently Mark and Jessica believe they're justified in overruling that because they have an infant and I don't. The following day, I contacted my attorney. I was still attempting to comprehend the reality that my own sibling would take things this far. My attorney, fortunately, assured me that their lawsuit was weak at best. The testament is unbreakable, and there's no legitimate foundation for their assertion. Nevertheless, simply knowing I'd need to navigate this ordeal made me furious. How could they pull me into litigation over something that isn't even questionable? What truly infuriated me, though, was discovering who was financing their lawsuit. My parents? They've been assisting Mark and Jessica in covering the costs of an attorney to pursue legal action against me. When I challenged them, my mother attempted to rationalize it by saying, "We're simply attempting to create fairness for everyone." Fair? What about the years I dedicated to saving and laboring to make this property habitable? What about the reality that I didn't request this house that was passed down to me? My father was equally unhelpful. He informed me, "We simply don't want to witness Mark and Jessica facing hardship. You're managing well independently." I was astounded by what I was hearing. I stated plainly that they were encouraging Mark's sense of entitlement and that I'd never pardon them if they continued supporting this. My mother began weeping, saying, "I don't understand what's become of this family." Yeah, Mom, neither do as if everything wasn't sufficient. Jessica has escalated her crusade against me on social platforms. She's been sharing all these pitiful narratives about how cold-hearted I am for monopolizing the family residence while their infant is confined to a cramped apartment. She even shared photographs of their apartment, portraying it worse than reality, accompanied by a caption like, "All we desire is a secure environment for our baby. Is that excessive to request?" The responses are filled with individuals expressing sympathy for her, commenting things like, "Your sister ought to feel ashamed, and family is meant to be supportive of one another." I attempted to disregard it, but then I began receiving communications from extended relatives, aunts, even individuals I haven't contacted in years. They're all insisting I should make the proper decision and provide assistance. Some of them even criticized me for being thankless regarding the inheritance. It's as though they've entirely disregarded that this is my property. At this stage, I feel as though I'm going insane. Every time I attempt to clarify the circumstances, I'm confronted with guilt, manipulation, and blame. It's not merely the legal action or the social media chaos, it's the reality that my own relatives have betrayed me. I feel as though I'm engaged in a conflict I never volunteered to participate in. But then circumstances took an even more troubling direction. While reviewing the legal paperwork once more, I discovered something peculiar. Concealed in the documentation was reference to a family arrangement that I allegedly authorized, indicating that the house was intended to be communal. I was perplexed because I've never authorized anything of that nature. When I presented it to my attorney, he validated what I was already suspecting: the signature was falsified. I was absolutely enraged. Who would descend to such levels? My attorney indicated it was probably Mark and Jessica, but establishing it would require time. Meanwhile, They've been informing everyone I'm prolonging the legal proceedings simply to antagonize them, as if that wasn't sufficient. I recently learned that Jessica has been misrepresenting their monetary circumstances. An acquaintance of mine observed her at an upscale baby boutique spending hundreds on premium nursery items. She's also been sharing images of their hardships on Facebook directly, alongside photographs of elaborate meals and beauty treatments. So much for barely surviving financially. I'm beginning to question if this was their strategy from the beginning. Did they view me as an invulnerable target? Did they assume I'd simply surrender and transfer them the house to prevent confrontation? The notion disgusts me. I've consistently attempted to support my relatives, but this feels like a betrayal I can't recover from. The legal action is still in progress, but my attorney is assured will prevail. That being said, the harm has already been inflicted. My connection with my relatives feels shattered beyond restoration. Every time I reflect on what they've subjected me to, I experience this combination of fury and sorrow that I can't adequately articulate. And the final insult. Mark appeared at my residence once more yesterday. He had the audacity to declare, "You're going to have remorse about this when the baby matures. They'll discover what type of aunt you truly are." I didn't even acknowledge it with a reply. I simply shut the door. I'm uncertain how this will conclude. But one thing's certain, I'm not surrendering my house. If that labels me as the antagonist in their narrative, then so be it. This isn't merely about the property any longer. This concerns a family revelation that's entirely demolished everything I believed I understood about my existence. To summarize, my brother Mark and his spouse Jessica are taking legal action against me for my house, the one my grandparents bequeathed to me in their testament. My parents are supporting them and even financing their legal expenses. Circumstances have been strained, to put it mildly, but I was assured that the lawsuit would collapse since the house is lawfully mine. What I didn't anticipate was for this conflict to expose a revelation that would transform everything. Began several weeks ago. My attorney had requested some family records to further invalidate Mark and Jessica's assertion that the house was part of a family inheritance intended to be distributed. I didn't consider it significant. I assumed it was merely routine protocol. But when the records arrived, I observed something unusual. There was a document I'd never encountered before, marked with my grandparents' names and dated many decades before my birth. Curiosity overcame me, and I examined it. Inside were correspondences, legal contracts, and a handwritten message from my grandmother. What I discovered made my heart sink. It appears Mark isn't my complete brother. He's my half-brother. Evidently, before my parents married, my mother had a relationship with a different man, Mark's biological father. My grandparents were aware of it and were outraged, but they consented to maintain the secret for the purpose of family harmony. The correspondences disclosed that Mark's biological father had provided a substantial amount of funds to my mother when Mark was born, with the expectation that it would be utilized for Mark's welfare. My grandparents used a portion of that money to purchase the house that ultimately became mine. I remained there in disbelief. Reviewing the correspondences repeatedly, it felt as though the foundation beneath me had collapsed. My whole existence, I assumed we were a typical family, well, as typical as families can be. But this was a deception on numerous levels. My mother had maintained this secret for decades, and now it was emerging in the most horrible manner imaginable. Initially, I was uncertain what to do with this knowledge. Should I challenge my mother? Inform Mark. I decided to withhold it for several days while I absorbed everything. But naturally, revelations like this have a tendency of detonating on their own. Last week, during another intense dispute with Mark, he exclaimed, "You don't even comprehend the complete situation. You're not the only one Grandma and Grandpa wronged." I became motionless. I questioned what he implied, and that's when he revealed the shocking truth. He was aware. He wasn't my complete brother. He's been aware for years. Apparently, our mother disclosed the reality to him when he was an adolescent. But rather than feeling deceived by her, he felt as though he was deserving of something additional. As though the funds his biological father provided was legitimately his. That's why he feels justified in claiming the house. In his perspective, the house was acquired with his inheritance, so it should transfer to him. I was rendered speechless. I questioned why he didn't simply mention something sooner if he felt that manner. And he responded, "Because I understood you'd never relinquish it voluntarily." He confessed that the lawsuit, the falsified paperwork, even the social media operation were all components of a scheme to coerce me into transferring the house. I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. This wasn't simply entitlement. This was deliberate exploitation. And my parents were complicit in it. When I challenged them, they didn't even refute it. My mother stated, "We simply wanted to rectify things for Mark." I questioned her why she believed it was acceptable to deceive me, to allow me to assume this house was genuinely mine, only to reverse course and assist Mark in attempting to seize it. Have your entire future before you. Mark requires this more. That was the instant I understood I could no longer place my trust in them. They didn't perceive me as their daughter. They viewed me as a barrier to Mark's contentment. I informed them I desired no association with any of them until this situation was settled. Since that moment, I've been experiencing a turbulent mix of feelings, age, betrayal, grief. I've experienced it all. But I've also begun to feel an unexpected sense of liberation, at minimum. Now I understand the reality. I comprehend why my family has regarded me like someone on the outside, why they've consistently gone to extreme lengths for Mark while anticipating me to manage independently. It doesn't diminish the pain, but it provides me with understanding regarding the legal action. My attorney is preparing to challenge their allegations with everything we've revealed. The falsified paperwork alone is sufficient to demolish their lawsuit, and I'm contemplating filing accusations for fraud. Mark and Jessica are intensifying their efforts, though. They've been informing everyone I've taken Mark's rightful inheritance. Some of our extended relatives have abandoned me, but others have begun to recognize their deceptions. The house remains mine, and I'm not relinquishing it. But the price of retaining it has been steeper than I ever anticipated. My connection with my parents and Mark is entirely shattered. I'm uncertain if I'll ever have the capacity to pardon them for what they've perpetrated. But one thing's definite. I'm finished being the family's target for blame.